Good morning. Welcome to episode 71 of the Driller Newscast. I'm your host, Brock Yorty, and this is your weekly update on the news and stories impacting the drilling and water industry. We're going to start this week with Cade Merritt of TDH walking us around his piece of equipment at the South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee that just wrapped up last week. It's a beautiful piece of equipment, and we always thank TDH for the support of the newscast. Our feature this week is Jesse Richardson of the Water System Council. Jesse's going to talk to us about those big three water battles we've been talking about, Navajo Nation versus the United States and the state of Arizona, and how the Supreme Court settled out. Then, of course, Sackett versus the EPA and how we're still in limbo. And then finally, Texas versus New Mexico that started July 3rd, where now they're starting to determine what is the impact on pulling water from the Rio Grande. And let's face it, Colorado promised New Mexico and Texas water. And that water is also supposed to ship down 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico. Look at what's happening in Tijuana right now. Look at what's happening in the Navajo Nation. This is a big deal. This is an excellent episode. It's all live from the Jubilee that wrapped up last week. Let's jump right into it with Cade with TDH. Hi, this is Brock Yorty live at the South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee, and I have one of my favorite equipment manufacturers and also a sponsor of the Driller Newscast, TDH. We got Cade with us. Cade, what's exciting about this piece of equipment you got here? What are you guys doing down there in Texas?
Man, we're excited to be here for the Jubilee once again. This year we brought one of our custom TDH units set up with a flatbed design with the custom toolboxes that we make in-house. Very excited to see what the Jubilee has to offer every year. This year, with the flatbed setup, the boxes are set up in a way that's really for a driller. You know, a lot more space, a lot of drawers, a lot of cabinets, underbody boxes that are really set up for the tools and the pumps that guys like to carry with them. This one's got really all the options. It's got the wire winder, it's got the sand land, it's got hydraulic tilting pipe racks. The TDH, as you well know, it's got the electric over hydraulic control panel here. That thing's pretty sweet. We've got a weight load indicator, so it tells you in pounds what you're pulling. It's got control of your hydraulic pressures, your temperatures, your PTO hours. Gives you speed control over your winches. Because of how fast our winches are, it gives you the option to slow them down. And as you can see, it's wide open deck space. You guys can carry a ton of stuff on here. So very excited to show what our capabilities are. We have a 140,000 square foot machine shop that allows us to build 99% of everything you see here in-house. So excited to see, you know, what options are out here and what we're comparing to. But a lot of guys love this design because of how much space it gives you.
Thanks, Cade.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, this is Brock Yorty, Driller Newscast. We're at the South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee, and we have our good industry friend, legal counsel for the Water Systems Council, Jesse Richardson here. And what's going on at the Jubilee?
Oh gosh, there's a lot going on here. Lots of educational sessions and exhibits, and today's the last day, so we're here until 2 o'clock today.
What's going on with water in the top court in the nation right now?
It is crazy. There's so much going on. I can't get any sleep anymore. I'm not trying to deal with all of this stuff. So where do you want me to start?
I'd love you to start. We covered, the Navajo Nation versus the United States. I believe many of us are disappointed in how that turned out. What do you think?
Yeah, it's the court has been frustrating in some ways lately, and this was a frustrating case to me because the majority and the dissent answered different questions. The majority opinion said that the United States didn't have to take affirmative steps to ensure that the Navajo Nation has water. And they were concerned that if they ruled otherwise, that the United States might have to actually like put in pipes or put in infrastructure. And they said, well, if they have to do that, then maybe they have to build schools and do all kinds of things. The dissenting opinion said, well, that's really not the question here. The question is, does the United States have to take into account the Navajo Nation's water rights when they're dealing with the mess in the Colorado River right now? So yeah, it was disappointing because it kind of, I don't know that it resolved much, and probably not many of you are familiar with Federal Reserve water rights, but all of the Indian tribes, as well as any Federal Reserve or federal park, nature preserve, whatever, the federal government impliedly reserves enough water to fulfill the purposes of that. And so many, particularly of the Indian tribe rights, have not been quantified. So we're going in blind here, and we don't know. And I think, frankly, the states are very short-sighted on this, because if I'm a state, if I'm Arizona, I want to know what are the Navajo Nation's water rights, because going forward, we need to know that before we can resolve how we're going to divide up the water in the Colorado River. So I think the states are being short-sighted. They must be playing the four corners offense to try to stall, but we're eventually going to have to decide what is that quantity of water rights that the Navajo Nation holds.
It's wild, because we know that there's $5 billion worth of agriculture that depends on that water. There's 40 million Americans, but 300,000 Navajo natives, along with the other tribes in that area, that's their sovereign land. And we, in 1868, made an agreement, and the compact is 1922. And it's very odd to me that you can say, here's your sovereign nation. And that was very much in Gorsuch's, dissent, that how do we overlap one to the other?
Yeah, and those Native American rights, those Federal Reserve water rights, are superior to all the other rights. I call them super water rights because they have priority back to 1868, and nobody can really intrude upon that.
It's a very interesting time.
Yes, indeed.
So beyond the Navajo Nation, we haven't talked since Sackett versus EPA, where Justice Kavanaugh said this is a big deal for existing, waters of the United States, and that was also a split. What was your thoughts on that?
Well, the Sackett case, again, in my opinion, it really didn't move the ball forward very much. And it was a split, but it was a 9-0 decision that, number one, the Sackett's wetland was not covered under the Clean Water Act. And number two, Justice Kennedy's substantial nexus test is not the test we apply. So that was unanimous. But when we go to the next step, then we had somewhat of a split with Justice Kavanaugh joining the quote-unquote liberal wing of the court in saying that a wetland is adjacent if it is separated by a berm or sand dune or something of that nature. Whereas the majority said, no, adjacent means abut. And it has to have, in the terminology of Justice Scalia's opinion, it has to have a continuous surface connection, but that means it abuts. And also, the majority said that in order to be waters of the United States, it has to basically be a continuously flowing body of water. So I think what has been decided is that adjacent means abut for wetlands, and that things like intermittent or ephemeral streams are not going to be waters of the United States. But there are still a lot of questions, and I think for lawyers, a lot of litigation is coming up. A lot of people say that continuous surface connection, what does that mean? So we might have litigation over that, because the court also said continuous surface connection such that where the wetland begins and the land ends is indistinguishable. And they got that language from the Swank case, where Justice Scalia was describing Riverside Bayview. I think the bigger question is, in all of these cases, the court has never told us what a tributary is. And I talked about this in North Carolina a few days ago, and I laid out the regulatory definition of waters of the United States, which notably the court didn't do in the Sackett case, which is really strange. But if the wetland is adjacent to, among other things, a tributary of waters of the United States, it's covered. So I think the next thing that we're going to see is, several years ago, right after Rapanos, we were getting what I call these tributary of a tributary of a tributary case, where it was adjacent to a ditch which flowed into a non-navigable stream and eventually made it to navigable waters. What is a tributary? And are we going to have these tributary or tributary cases? And then, to muddy the waters some more.
Well, did they not reference we don't want to regulate mud puddles? Was that muddying the waters?
But I think this makes the Maui County case even more important, because, wetlands have to abut navigable waters to be covered. But what if you have contaminants that go into the groundwater and eventually make it to navigable waters? So I think the Supreme Court might have clarified a few things, but we have a lot more questions.
So my final question. One, it's very odd to me that the Supreme Court always releases these opinions on holiday weekends and then says, peace, we're out of here. You guys all debate all over this and ruin my Memorial Day or my 4th of July, but you hit me with, on July 3rd, Texas versus New Mexico. What is going on there?
Oh, yeah, there's another interesting one that is going to be, I think, important for the groundwater industry, and we'll be hearing about that over the next several months or year. So Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado had been fighting, and it's really Texas versus New Mexico. New Mexico's not delivering the amount of water to the Texas border that they agreed to in the Rio Grande Compact. And so Texas filed suit. They have been fighting over this for years now. And finally, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado said, we've reached an agreement where they set the amount of water that has to be delivered, and if it's not, they have penalties. Basically, if New Mexico can't deliver this water, then they're going to be giving more water to Texas under the agreement. And the United States, which had intervened in the case, they objected. And they said, we don't like this agreement. We think that it makes it more difficult for us to manage this federal project on the Texas-New Mexico border. We don't think it complies with the spirit of the compact. We don't think it's a reasonable settlement. And on July 3rd, the special master overseeing the case came out with, I think it's 135 pages, happy 4th of July to me, report that basically ruled against the United States on all of those objections and recommended that the United States Supreme Court accept the settlement agreement between the states. So now we wait to see if the United States will file formal exceptions to that. Will the United States Supreme Court want to hear oral arguments? And eventually the United States Supreme Court will decide whether they're going to approve that settlement or reject that settlement. I think given the posture of the case, they're going to say, yes, we're going to accept this settlement. And then, that doesn't end it. We talk all the time, like, does this end it? Oh, it's never, Yogi Berra, it ain't over till it's over. Now, the real concern is, can New Mexico live up to the agreement? And I've already talked to some people, and they said groundwater is in the bullseye.
It is. We saw that with oral arguments to Navajo Nation versus the United States and Arizona, that they said they have endless resources of getting cheap, pumpable water. And it's not cheap to obtain and drill those wells. We know that. It's very complex. And it's poignant because we had those rivers, those storm rivers that came through and dumped trillions of gallons of water into California in the western. And we've had the snowpack. And we've seen that our reservoirs have come back up. And we've also seen Nevada, Arizona, and California reduce how many million acre feet they're going to do. But we still owe Mexico 1.5 million acre feet.
Yep.
New Mexico is water stressed. And Texas is water stressed. We see water issues in Tijuana right now. We got up here and we got some storage, and we're covering part of that 40 million Americans, but it's still that down gradient. We got a lot going on.
Yeah. And one of the big issues in Texas versus New Mexico is the number of wells that were put in near the river. And the allegation is that those wells are pumping water from the river. And so we're going to see what's New Mexico going to do. And is that going to impact domestic water wells in New Mexico? We have to be on the watch for that.
And it's straight back to the Navajo Nation again?
Yep. And you talked about the agreement that the Colorado River states had entered into. I've been asked about that. I said it's a Band-Aid. And it's a short-term solution, and I hesitate to use the word solution, but it's a short-term measure. But long-term, we don't have an answer yet.
We're in a very dynamic time for groundwater, and all they realize is, it's 23 to 26 million private water wells on homes, and we just saw with the Department of Interior, we just shifted who's going to be director of water, and it's a tough place to be. It's a great time to have you as an expert to be able to help us understand it, but it's also scary to know where private water wells are going.
It's a great time to be a lawyer, I tell you, a water lawyer, because I was telling you before we started, I don't have time to sleep anymore. There's just too much going on.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all you do for the Water System Council and keeping us educated, and it's a big deal.
Well, thank you, Brock. Good to be with you again.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you for joining us for episode 71 of the Driller Newscast. Man, so much going on that we need a good mid-year conference like the South Atlantic Jubilee. Everybody came together, we professionally developed, and next week, episode 72, we're going to continue the conversation with workforce development, hiring the next generation, stopping and smelling the roses, and the big Southeast fight to get control back so private homeowners can have water wells regardless if there's a pipeline coming in or not. I hope you join us next week. This is going to be some great information. And again, thank you to Cade and Jesse for taking the time and dropping all that excellent knowledge. Stay safe out there. It's still hot. Stay hydrated. And let's just keep on advocating for smart drilling practices, good environmental stewards, and protecting the groundwater. Thanks, everybody.